Hi, I'm Michael Polozola with the LSU AgCenter. I'm a regional horticulture agent for the Central Region, and this is
Robbie Hutchins, and I am the Area Forestry and Wildlife Extension Agent for the LSU AgCenter for the Central Region.
And today we're going to be looking at some trees and trying to select some trees that you might want to plant in your home landscape. So what we're going to start with is kind of looking at some trees that we might not want to look in for the home landscape, and we'll go over some of the reasons why. Robbie, what do you think of this tree? I see it's got this fork here. How would that affect long-term health of the tree, a fork this low?
Michael, as you said, that fork is extremely low, and because of that, this tree would be much more prone to splitting. The larger that the tree gets, the weight of the crown here would start to pull this thing apart, and you would have, and if you had an ice storm or a hurricane like we had in 2020, it could lend a tree to splitting, and you don't want to select this type of tree for a tree that you're going to depend on for a long time.
Now, if this was the only tree we had to choose from, could we make a correction by pruning this out? Would it straighten out? Or if it's the only one, if it had some special meaning because it was from a seedling? I know in a retail setting we'd just probably move to the next one, but if we for some reason had to salvage it, could we?
Yes, we could, Michael. That's a very good point. We're very fortunate because live oaks respond well to pruning, and they actually quote unquote fill in, so we could, if needed, take this off here and allow this part of the tree to take the growth, and then we could train this and prune this over time and make this a desirable tree if we had to do so. So Michael, what do you think about this tree? This tree doesn't have the issue of forking down low like the past tree. What do you think about this?
I agree with you. It has this nice straight bottom, except when we follow it all the way up, we start to have this curve in the leader here. And this is going to be long-term structural issues. The wood will be dense, but it'll be a weak point. And I think ideally, you almost see where it would be missing that straight line there.
I see.
I think we need to look for another tree, but we could use this one if we needed to. If it was already in the landscape, we could train around this, I believe.
I agree. I think that's a very good recommendation.
Hey, Robbie. So looking at this tree here, it's obvious that we wouldn't like the location of the fork right here. But say this fork was higher up. Tell me some of the other negative things here that we might want to keep in mind.
So the issue with this fork is really the branch angle where this branch comes off, and it's at a bad angle, and you can see here this is actually already starting to try to split.
Yeah.
So that means that it doesn't matter where on the tree this would be located, it's going to cause long-term problems.
So this would be very sensitive with our windy weather we have at times.
Yes.
Even though live oaks are very wind-resistant trees, with the tension it might split at that point later on. The bigger the tree gets and the more weight it has behind it.
That's exactly right, Michael. That's exactly, and again, look as small as this tree is. This tree is about an inch and a half caliper, and you already see the splits starting. So you can imagine when these limbs get as big as live oak limbs and the weight gets as much as they get, what's going to happen? Right?
And that would be a sensitive spot to rot later on, wouldn't it?
Yes, indeed. I mean, that's going to that is going to provide a direct avenue for heart rot fungi to get in there and get started.
But at this age, could we correct it by going ahead and taking one of these out? Or is it always going to be a long-term structural issue?
So Michael, the only time that you really could do it is at this age. When it's still young, there's a good possibility that you could prune this limb off, and then this leader would take over. And again, as we said earlier, if this is what you already have in the ground, or if this tree has some kind of sentimental value, it would be worth a shot. So,
and would you do that prior to planting or after a year?
I would again wait until after a year, because again, the stress factor, you don't want to put it under an excessive amount of stress. It's already going to be under some stress from planting shock, so you want it to recover.
I wanted to bring that up because I know I would be tempted to go ahead and make the correcting cuts before planting, but you are right. You're letting it have the carbohydrate reserves to support, and then after that year would be a much better time.
Yes. So Michael, what do you think about this tree? I think this tree looks pretty good. What do you think?
I think it has a pretty nice straight trunk.
Right.
Now, the only thing I think we're going to need to do, and we would need to do this for any tree I suspect that we select, is prune upward a little bit at a time. Can you describe the process, how you would probably do that over several years for me?
Yes, Michael. So the way I look at pruning and pruning upward is kind of like a haircut, excuse the analogy, but you can always take more off later. And so you want to be very conservative when you start to prune up, because you don't want to damage the photosynthetic ability of the tree and thus hampering its growth. So we want to make sure the tree stays healthy as we prune upward.
And just kind of as a visual example for people who are watching, would you say maybe about this much up a year pruning these lower limbs, depending on how it gets established, if it's happy in its spot?
Exactly, and in that way, as it continues to grow upward, it's increasing its photosynthetic ability up here, so cutting that much off of as far as the limbs down here is not going to negatively affect the tree.
But that would be something you might want to do a year after planting so that it has everything it needs to get started.
That's right. As it goes through the planting shock and recovers from planting shock, that's when you start to do that. One of the worst things you can do for a newly planted tree is put it under more stress by doing heavy pruning.
So we would start the tree training that 1 year after establishment, making certain we've watered it and maybe fertilized it lightly that first year.
Yes, a very gentle
and getting
fertilizer,
nice,
yes.
get good growth. And I see where we're starting to have our fork up here. Would you probably stick with this one, or would you maybe prune that out later to train it up a little bit higher?
So the truth is, as we go through this, I mean, if we planted this tree today, as you and I are talking about now, it'll be next spring before we started doing any pruning.
Yes.
We could reevaluate it as we move up the tree, but naturally, I think this is the fork you're going to want to try to select for, unless a better one moves up there. Now, in my opinion, I think you need to select for at least 3 main branches to come out to try to counterbalance it. Is that kind of what you think?
I like that idea, because if you have the 3, I know I've seen in large established live oaks, if you have the 2 fork, you can split in half later from the weight. And if you have the 3, it's more evenly distributed. And if you need to anchor the tree later on, it gives you a little bit better surface area to work with, doesn't it?
Exactly. I ran into that last week with somebody that was trying to stabilize a large tree that was splitting, but they only had those two sides. There's really no way to effectively cable that tree to keep it from going ahead and splitting, and so he's limited to what he can do. So I think that's exactly right. I think this is a beautiful tree, Michael. I think any homeowner will be proud to have this in their landscape.
Yeah, I think this would be a great one, and especially you avoid the temptation. It's not like it's so big around. We're not going and picking the biggest tree. We're picking the one with the best form for long-term health for our landscape.
That's right.